I'm Joyce Hornady. You might say accuracy is my business. I make bullets.
You are listening to the Hornady Podcast.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in on another episode of the Hornady Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Swerzik, and I'm sitting at a table now for everybody listening and not watching with a good group of guys. To my right, I've got the Marketing Director, Neil Davies, and across the table, Assistant Director of Engineering, Joe Thielen, and Senior Ballistician, Jayden Quinlan. Guys, thanks for coming on the podcast with me.
Yeah,
Thank you, Seth.
So right now, we're pre-new product launch, but we're getting ready to launch our 2022 new products. And as you'd imagine, listeners, this new product launch is a little bit smaller than maybe what we typically do. Considering the state of the industry, though, that's pretty standard. However, that doesn't mean that we don't have some really cool stuff that we're excited about. And specifically on this podcast, we're talking about the new bullet, the new hunting bullet, the Hornady Cx Bullet. So let's dive in here, guys. What is the Hornady Cx Bullet, and what does that mean for Hornady? Let's start at the top. Let's define CX and kind of go from there. What is CX?
Well, the CX is copper alloy expanding. Big differentiator, copper alloy versus solid copper, which Joe will probably get into at some point, or Jayden. But it is it represents a significant advancement in monolithic, controlled expansion hunting bullets, particularly through aeroballistic advancements and geometric changes that have happened to monolithic bullets.
Okay, so copper alloy expanding, and it's like you mentioned, not solid copper, and a purpose-built hunting bullet. And we've had a monolithic bullet in our lineup historically since 2009ish, and that was the GMX, which did tremendous. The terminal performance of our GMX bullet is world renowned. It's phenomenal. And what led us to go away from that? Jayden, Joe, you can talk about that. What spurred the CX? Why would we change something that was already good? Why would we go to the CX?
Well, we've learned a lot about aerodynamics and made some really cool discoveries over the past 10 years with heat shield tip, with A-tip, all these new bullets that you've seen us come out with, and that's all a result of figuring things out that have kind of gone undiscovered before. So in that, you combine that with the fact that, like you said, that GMX was the legacy product. It had been around a long time, and it kind of was what it was, not particularly for a reason, right? You needed a monolithic hunting bullet. It has its place. It's an awesome bullet, but it was never looked at with a microscope. And with what we've learned and what we know now, was any of that applicable, or the instruments we have to measure now, for use with like building a purpose-built from the ground up monolithic, like as good as you could make it? And so that was kind of the groundwork of let's attempt this and see what happens. Let's see what we learn. The end result is the CX itself. But Joe, you can chime in there on your opinion.
So I think the CX Bullet lends itself to, much like a lot of our other products, and we've talked about it before, but at this table, today we are all hunters. Let's just call it what it is. No different than anybody else. We're all hunters. We love to hunt.
Quite literally, before we started recording, we were just talking about, gosh, I can't wait to go back out in the field. Joe, you were out antelope hunting this last weekend. I was as well.
Yeah.
And it's all we talk about.
So that's much like whether it's competitive shooting, whatever it is. As hunters, we're like, okay, what do we use our products, and we're like, how do we make this? I want this a little better for whatever reason it may be. So for CX, when you look at a monolithic bullet, they're generally lighter. They have to be lighter. They don't have lead in them, so they're not as dense. So per weight, they're longer. So then you got to have faster spin rates and all that in the barrels. Well, you're limited by what's out there. So we looked at, okay, if it has to be lighter, how do we, at the very core of a GMX, or I shouldn't say a GMX, any monolithic projectile, whether it's CX, whoever it is, they need velocity, speed, to get them to work really well terminally. They're harder, they're tougher. We'll get into all the attributes of those bullets. Bottom line, they need more speed when they impact the target. So that's when Jayden's talking about, we go look at stuff under the microscope. How do we get it to the target with more energy, with more speed? Well, that's where you come into, okay, what features are on the bullet? What's the ogive look like? The grooves and all those things. And we can dive into those whenever you want, of what sets this bullet apart. But that would be the backstory to why this came about, is we all wanted a better monolithic hunting projectile.
That's a great point, and I think our listeners and anybody that's familiar with the company hopefully understands by now is Hornady is a family-owned company, relatively small, and it was built on and is still full of passion for the use of the product. Obviously a business is in business to make money, but man, it's in business so that we can go hunting.
But I mean, yeah, that's exactly right. The pretty much all of the significant advancements that have been accomplished by all the people that work here that comprise the company Hornady have been because, wanted a better widget, right? I mean, from the very beginning, Joyce Hornady started the company because he was dissatisfied with the quality or capabilities of bullets that were available in the post-war era. So in 1949, he set about to make great bullets. And then, from that first bullet made, which was a 30 cal 150, we are now where we are with what we have. And every bullet we're making now traces its heritage back to that bullet and a whole bunch of them along the way. But from one advancement comes another advancement, So even if there was a product along the way and a bullet or an ammo or what have you that wasn't a phenomenal seller, something was typically learned from that. Now I don't develop the products, but I work closely with everybody that does, and we are also responsible for communicating or hearing from customers and what they want and things like that. But most of the time, the majority of our really awesome products are just simply skunkworks projects that become reality and advance the capabilities of ballistic products. So the CX Bullet, it's got a couple specific design attributes that really helped push the envelope, of monolithic bullet performance. It's no secret we were not the first ones on the market with a monolithic bullet, but I think at this point with the CX, we are certainly the best monolithic bullet option out there. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is. But now, just to start kind of at the beginning, when you put a cannular or a groove on a bullet, it increases the drag on the bullet. So it lowers your BC. It's typically not a good thing from a ballistic standpoint. Now, it has some terminal performance benefits, and it also has some internal ballistics benefits as well. So when we were going with the CX and we were trying to make the best monolithic bullet possible, how did you isolate the geometry of that groove or that cannular? How did you discover that we could make that better? Because that is one of the things that makes the CX what it is.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things I think you have to look at is if you look at let's call them legacy monolithics, the stuff that's been out there for quite some time, the terminal performance of those bullets is fantastic, right? For the guys that are looking for a lead-free option that gives them deep penetration, awesome initiation of expansion, great wound channel characteristics, that exists, right, with the legacy monolithic projectiles that have been out there. But what doesn't exist is a monolithic projectile that has its aerodynamics maximized so that you can shoot it at longer distances and get that same performance. So what we did there is said, okay, there's, like Joe said, there's limitations that you have because you're working with one homogeneous material, the copper alloy. And then you have shape limitations of, okay, this projectile is meant to be used in a 30-06 or a Win Mag or whatever the cartridge, might be. That kind of defines your size, right? It has to fit within this envelope. So within those limitations, you don't have a lot of other tools to work with besides shape. Now, like you mentioned, one of the things is the grooves or the cannulars that are on there. So those serve a couple purposes. One is to reduce fouling and pressure in bore. So because that monolithic material is so much harder, it doesn't have much give to it compared to, say, a lead core bullet, which can give a little bit. Mm-hmm. So it's gonna foul worse and it could generate more pressure. So those grooves relieve that. They give the material that's displaced by the rifling a place to go. You can think of them as a relief groove. They also allow you to crimp the case mouth in and have some other benefits like you mentioned. But when we looked at that, we said, okay, to make a better monolithic bullet, we need to make it retain velocity better. Because if it can retain velocity better, it's going to have a terminal performance range envelope that's extended compared to the legacy stuff. You can shoot it further downrange and get the same terminal performance. So to reduce the drag, we look at the grooves. And we looked at the traditional ones that are on the monolithics that are out there. And the question was, well, why are they that way? Why are they in that location? Why are they that way? There's not an answer. So we started looking into it. Is there anything that we could do to positively affect that? And what you see in the CX is exactly that. The grooves that are on the CX bullet are unlike any other monolithic bullet out there. And we found that lowered the drag. In combination with that lowered the drag enough that now those bullets became applicable for the heat shield tip. So if you're familiar with ELD Match or ELDX and the drag benefits that you got from that, you now have that same thing in the CX. So we have that kind of tried and true monolithic terminal performance that's been around for a long time, but we've juiced it up on the aerodynamic side so that you can get that performance over a longer distance. Because let's face it, I mean, the capability of the hunter today with the quality of barrels and optics and actions and stocks and bullets and ammo, I mean, a guy today can shoot a group at 400 yards that's better than groups guys were shooting 50 years ago at 100 or 200, right? So the capability is there. So let's give them a bullet that will do the job.
You nailed it. I mean, that's exactly right. And it goes back to what we said earlier. I mean, the company is always looking at advancing our capabilities. And when it comes to the monolithic projectile, the legacy for this, the one it can trace its lineage back to most directly is obviously the GMX bullet. So these advancements, by using a Doppler radar, another significant advent in the company's capabilities, has showcased, some of the deficiencies in certain products, and then you got to go about trying to create solutions that will advance that product. So consistently evolving, consistently getting better, and then when advancements are made that are so vast, although they sound like small changes, they're big. They lead to big things, and now you end up with a brand new projectile called the CX.
Yep, and that's well said by everybody. And the fact that just by changing that groove geometry, so to go back a step here and kind of more clearly define the heat shield tip for those listeners that aren't super familiar with it. So if a bullet is launched at a given velocity and it has low enough drag that it hangs on to that velocity for a certain amount of time, which equates to distance, the temperature that's created, called aerodynamic heating at the tip, for a traditional polymer tip, it can get hot enough that the oncoming air actually starts to deform that polymer tip, and that changes the drag negatively, obviously. So just by changing that groove geometry, we were able to increase the ballistic efficiency enough that it was starting to deform the traditional polymer tips, which is not achievable with the old cannular geometry. So just that one little change is remarkable. That little of a change, one, makes that big of a difference. And it's remarkable that, two, we have the technology to see that. That's pretty darn cool when you're looking at things that, might make a difference of 5, 8, 10%, something like that. That's a small difference, and to see that on the radar is really cool.
And then now that gives you further effective range, basically, for your projectile. Now you have a monolithic bullet that is an extended range hunting projectile.
Right. And this kind of marries really well, and I might get this out of order, or hopefully I don't make this conversation disjointed, but to remove the talk about the new CX bullet, it's no secret that over the last decade and a half or so, we have introduced the 6.5 Creedmoor. Well, we'll start with the 30 TC, the 6.5 Creedmoor, the 6 Creedmoor, the 6mm arc, the 6.5 PRC, and the 300 PRC.
Don't forget Lever Evolution, Thruway,
right.
Marlin Express.
Yeah.
And,
there's been a host. There's been
critical defense, critical duty. Yeah,
there's been a host of all other new products, but the reason I mentioned those cartridges specifically is that we kind of pushed the envelope in cartridge chamber design and how those two interface together, and the twist rates applicable, because in 6mm, the standard twist rate is usually a 1 in 10 in a 243 or a 6mm Remington. Well, with the 6 Creedmoor, it's a 1 in 8 or 1 in 7 and 7. And with the 6.5, we went with a 1 in 8 instead of a 1 in 9. And in the 30 cal, we went with a 1 in 8.5 instead of 1 in 10 standard twist rates. And now, with the CX and what you guys have been able to do with design attributes on the CX bullet, now we were able to uncork a couple really awesome, sexy projectiles. I want to talk about those 3 pipe hitters that we're having with that initial launch, because I'm psyched. I know you guys can probably tell, but really long slipstream type bullets, they get me going. So let's talk about those because we got a huge lineup. We've got bullets from 6mm up to 375 in the CX, and we could talk about those as well. But man, those three that I mentioned, I'm pumped about those.
Yeah, so you have exactly what you said, these high performance cartridges. Why would you feed them with, crappy gasoline? Right?
Yeah, you got
in
race
your projectile.
got
Why
race
would you put
cars.
this stumpy little school bus of a projectile? For
Jade, yeah, you like your school bus.
I
analogy,
like
yeah,
short
yeah,
school
yeah.
buses too.
Race cars and school buses. Which
That's
one
right.
is more aerodynamically
That's right. That's a good
efficient?
analogy. But the point there is you have a cartridge that's capable of way more than the legacy bullets that you could just stick in it because it's the right caliber.
Mm-hmm.
So let's design something purpose-built that in the projectile complements the capabilities of the cartridge. And,
Yeah.
and Joe, the
Yeah,
go for it.
I was going to say, talk a little bit about twist rate and length. I kind of led into it, and I think you mentioned it previous, but those twist rates are important because of the homogeneous material and the how that works together with bullet length and its density, and why the bullets are typically a little lighter.
Yeah, well, the CX bullets, any monolithic bullet doesn't have lead in it, so it's not as a copper alloy is not as dense as lead. So in order to get the weight up in a homogeneous bullet, they have to get longer. When they get longer, you need more spin rate to make sure they stabilize and shoot well and all of those things. So that's why we designed, 10, 11 years on the Creedmoor, and PRC's a few years old and stuff. That's why we designed those cartridges when we did the way we did, to accept these, projectile advancements, no matter whether they're cup and core or monolithic. So that, I don't know, you guys sum that up. I can't really top that. The bus and the bus and
Seth's
the
enthusiasm, which is
So
tough to beat.
the hefty majority of the CX line is going to be useful in what I would call standard for caliber twist rates, and the lengths of those bullets are commensurate with that. They're going to fit in the 243 Winchester and the 308 Winchester and the 30-06. They're going to fit in the overall length window, and they're going to perform well in the standard SAMI twist rates. That's the hefty majority of the CX line, because that's the hefty majority of rifles out there that have been made in the last 50 years. But these new ones that I'm really excited about complement those cartridges well. And Joe, you mentioned earlier, monolithic bullets as a whole, they are married to velocity. They are speed freaks. The more speed, the better terminal performance. So our modern cartridges, you don't chew up that capacity shoving that long bullet in there, and you do get more speed. What did you guys look at? How did you come up with the shape of the 6mm 90, the 6.5mm 130 grain, and that 30 cal 190? What was kind of the inspiration there? Because when you look at them, when I just hold them in my hand, they almost look like a match bullet. Mm-hmm. So, and if you could talk about that, and I'd like to hear Jayden maybe talk to our listeners about shape drag and how that comes into play here.
Yeah. So, in general, the longer and sleeker the nose of the bullet can be, the ogive, the big benefit there is the high velocity portion of drag. So let's say, anything above 2,000 foot a second would be a fair number to just draw there. So anything above 2,000 foot a second has a major benefit from the ogive, the nose of the bullet, the front end. Now the back end, the boat tail, whether it's a flat base or boat tail or varying degrees of angle and length and stuff like that, that really starts to kick in around that 2,000 foot per second window and below. So you kind of have two aspects that play different ends of the velocity spectrum on how they affect the drag of the bullet. But specifically on that 90, the 130, and the 190, we said, okay, we're not limited by fitting it in the cartridge anymore, right? We don't have to shorten the nose up to make it fit in a cartridge overall length for a magazine box for a given SAMI cartridge that was designed 40 years ago, and these bullets weren't around then. Those limits are gone. The 6 Creed, 6.5 Creed, 6.5, and 300 PRC, we don't have that limit there. So we can do anything we want shape-wise. So the goal there is, if you can do anything you want shape-wise, do everything you can do shape-wise.
Yeah,
right?
right.
Cool.
So
that's cool. And you kind of, like you'd mentioned, you get away from that typical mock box magazine restraint with these new cartridges, and the weight of those projectiles is almost just a corollary. It just happened because we made these things as long and as sexy as we can. And like you said, you divide that bullet in half. You got the front half that really helps with the high speed, the high Mach value drag, and then you got the back side of that bullet that helps with the drag as it decelerates and gets slower and slower and slower. And these things did you compare them or use some design attributes similar to our ELDX and ELD match profiles, and that weight just came out to what it was, or was it specific to?
Absolutely. And to Joe's point, when you have that homogeneous, one material, you don't have a lead core. What that artificially does is it forces your center of gravity on the bullet to be further forward than a lead core bullet, because that lead is so dense that you can shift your center of gravity back with a lead core bullet. Well, the center of gravity is really important for the stability equation, or how stability works, and that is making sure your bullet flies point forward, right? That it's not going end over end or really high keyhole, angles of yaw. So with a monolithic, you're kind of stuck with that once you define the shape, because the material is what it is, right? You don't have the ability to put lead here or there to manipulate the center of gravity. The only thing that you can do to control the center of gravity location is the shape of the bullet and any internal cavities that you place in it, which we do for the expansion, right, for the terminal performance. So that can become a limitation on the shape. But what we did with these is we took them as far as we possibly could, to the point where we can guarantee they'll work in all situations.
Oh, that's fantastic. And anytime that we're maximizing range, I know, Jayden, you talked about it earlier. Joe, I know you're a competitor. Neil's a competitor. I'm a competitor. Jayden's
not a very
competitor.
good one.
No, not
We
at
try.
all. Yeah. We try. But like you start competing in say a precision rifle match or something, and you get really proficient in becoming what I like to call just a marksman or a rifleman. You get good at using your equipment and getting a good range and reading the wind and putting shots on target where you want them at extended ranges, and that benefits you as a hunter tremendously. And then to get the terminal performance benefit of a monolithic bullet with the CX, it's kind of the best of all worlds. Now, before we dive into the terminal performance rabbit hole, because I know you guys have a ton of experience over the course of a lot of years and a lot of places around the world using monolithic bullets, I want to talk a little bit about the point you mentioned, Neil, which was copper versus copper alloy. And I know Joe can speak to this because I think the manufacturability, if that's the right term, it's just easier to make a bullet, and it's easier to make a better bullet from the way I understand it, because the material is different than solid copper. So what is different about it? How does that work out and help us make a better bullet?
So that's one of the things that's in the name, copper alloy expanding, because it's an alloy material. It's not pure copper. Pure copper it's a softer. It's a soft metal. It gets gummy, might be sticky, sticky might be a good word. So when you hit it with 60,000 psi and send it down a steel barrel, sticky copper, you're going to leave it. It's going to leave it in the barrel. So you get fouling and pressure and inconsistencies over the life, the string of fire that you're doing or whatever. So the copper alloy material is a little harder, if you will. I don't know that harder is a good word, because it's still a soft yellow metal.
Lubrous per
se, but it's a better material that reduces the fouling because of the alloy in the copper. So it builds a better projectile from a shooting and internal ballistic standpoint, and barrel fouling and life and accuracy and all those things that go into that. So
if you're going to shoot a steady diet of monolithic bullets, it would be safe to say it's not horribly uncommon to see a gradual increase in velocity as that copper continues to build and build and build and build in the barrel. So by using an alloy instead of pure copper, we reduce that.
Yeah, you've seen this in the lab, Jayden, over the life of test guns or test barrels that we've shot a lot of rounds on, and yes, that is true. So,
I think the unwritten rule of gun cleaning was, if you're shooting copper projectiles, solid copper, you need to clean it after 20 shots at least. It starts to leave a lot of fouling in there. Whereas the new CX with the copper alloy doesn't leave as much residue in there, and you'll be able to shoot longer, and you won't have that buildup in there.
And you can also look at, we just talked about the purpose of those grooves. One of them is to relieve that pressure, give the material somewhere to flow. And you can see that with other monolithic bullets that are out there. You go look at the CX line and how many grooves we have on the CX. Now, those grooves are there to give the material somewhere to move into and to relieve pressure. Go look at how many grooves are on other monolithic bullets out there. You're going to see a lot more.
I remember a trade show where, when we first brought out the predecessor for this bullet, the GMX, and we had 2 pressure relieving grooves, there was an engineer that came over and kind of scoffed at us for only having 2 grooves. Oh, that won't work. Well,
it wouldn't work if it was the same material. And that's to Joe's point, because you're leaving more of that in the bore. And the more of it you leave in the bore, the more rapidly the fouling builds up, and the more rapid things are going to change.
Yep.
But with that copper alloy material, we can get away with less grooves. Well, the more grooves you have, the worse your drag is going to be.
Yep.
On every one of those grooves, you have a shockwave formation that's occurring. So if we can reduce the number of grooves that are on there, we lower the drag. And if we can do that in a way where we still maintain that ability to relieve pressure and give the material a place to flow and prevent the fouling, then we've given you a better bullet.
Yeah, you get all the performance benefits with less grooves.
Right.
One more comment on that. If go take a walk with me, if you will. So if a bullet of solid copper versus copper alloy is leaving more material in the bore, when you're making these bullets on the press, is that copper alloy, because it's more lubrous, is it easier to manufacture that bullet with tool and die wear for consistency's sake, where you're not loading up the dies and the punches?
Yeah, we're building these things with hardened steel and a lot of carbide, so we can work copper or copper alloy pretty much the same as far as tooling.
Okay.
Now, ejection, when you form them and you're pushing them out of a die and stuff like that, yes, a softer material is going to not
just gum up,
process as easily,
Okay.
if you will, in certain aspects. But as far as forming and making the bullet, they're probably similar on the manufacturing side.
Okay.
But they're darn sure not the same when it comes to performance side.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about the performance side, because the terminal performance is the draw to monolithics. The lead core bullets are great. I've almost exclusively used lead core bullets in a lot of my past hunting, and they've been great. But there are instances where a monolithic bullet is just better. It's the better option. And let's talk about the terminal performance, and then after that, we'll probably dive into who was this bullet for? Who was it really designed in mind when we designed it? But the terminal performance, again, legendary, the monolithic stuff. And I don't have a ton of experience shooting things with monolithic bullets. So for those of you that do, what do you see as the big performance benefits of going monolithic?
Oh, there's a lot. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, number one, from a performance standpoint, these bullets are highly accurate. I mean, that you have to have. So that's been developed, that's been incorporated. These bullets will shoot extremely well. As Jayden alluded to, you've got aeroballistic advantages. So now you do have the capability of hunting and shooting things at extended range beyond where traditional solid bullets were in the past. Now, terminally, they do a lot of things really well. The big advantage for these bullets is that they have high weight retention. So they're going to have 95+% weight retention. They don't lose much weight as they pass through tissue or bone, and they drive extremely deep. That's a huge advantage. So larger boned animals, thicker skinned animals, think feral hogs all over the south and southeast and all over. And then, of course, your deer, elk, moose. It's a fantastic choice. We can't guarantee it, that would be impossible to do, but more often than not, you're going to get a complete pass-through on deer and that size of animal, especially on pigs and things, that will help you with blood trailing. But deep penetration, the capability to maybe take a alternate angled shot than we're all trained and ready to do, particularly on an international hunt. If you ever hunt in Africa, a lot of times you're going to be with the PH, which is your guide over there, your professional hunter, and they want you to, shoot through heavy brush. And if they see any angle that is going to, maybe have a bullet fish into the vitals, they're going to want you to take that shot. So it could be a frontal shot, it could be a quartering on, quartering off, where you've got to fish a bullet in behind the rib cage. Well, the CX bullet is going to penetrate deeply enough in order to get those vitals and cause lethal effects for the results you're expecting.
And Joe, you just got back from a trip from Africa here just a couple of weeks ago. Did you take anything with the at the time it was kind of an R&D project, but now an official CX bullet?
Yeah, we shot the 130s out of a Creedmoor.
Okay.
I forget the 28. I want to say they're going like 28.75, I think, when I
Okay.
loaded them up. And the biggest thing that I would like to let the listeners know is, but the heat shield tip, retain velocity, everything that we talked about before, I was impressed and surprised at how hard and audibly different they sounded when they contacted the game. So,
okay.
I mean, we shot some smaller stuff up to some heavier game, like a water buck. And every time you could literally squeeze the trigger, gun goes off, and you could close your eyes and knew whether or not you drilled him because you could hear it. I mean,
Whack.
thwack.
Yeah.
And it's an audible, it's a different sound than the legacy stuff. And I credit that to the tip, the design, retained velocity, that it's a very awesome feature that just came. We didn't intend for that, but after using in the field, I was very impressed as a hunter. I'm like, hey, this is something that I look
It's
forward
an
to.
intangible benefit.
Absolutely.
But it's a benefit
Well, and
nonetheless.
I mean, maybe people get, okay, it's a quote unquote solid bullet. Well, it's a controlled expansion monolithic solid bullet. So that means that in the design, it was worked in that this bullet opens up quite rapidly.
Really
I mean, it's
quickly.
controlled expansion. So, I mean, you can see it on high-speed video. It starts to open up really quickly, but then it's not like a lead bullet that, with a gilding metal jacket then opens very rapidly. This starts to, it's controlled expansion. It's going to open, but it's also not affected by that parachute effect that you might get on like a typical bonded bullet or something like that, where it opens up really fast. You have a lot of weight retention, but it creates kind of a parachute. This is going to open up as it goes through and give you that deep penetration.
It's the quintessential, mushroom. And another thing we need to mention on terminal performance is because these bullets are longer, their length to diameter ratio is higher, you're going to get better penetration. That's just another intangible benefit.
Another corollary benefit that it just works.
It just works.
And that's funny that you said that it was audibly different because, this is a podcast that was recorded. I'm not sure if it will air before or after this one, but for the listeners out there, Preston and I went out, and you've all had Preston on the podcast before. Preston and I were hunting antelope in Wyoming last weekend, and he was shooting a 6.5 PRC with the 130 CX doing 3,000 feet per second, and we got set up on this antelope at 300 yards even, or 299 yards, and suppressed. And he took the shot, and the antelope ran 80 yards and laid down and died immediately. It was great. It covered a lot of ground. It didn't run for very long, but man, it covered ground like an antelope does. So it ran 60 or 80 yards or whatever it was and laid down and died. And we were talking right after the shot. Did you hear that? I mean, the sound was. I've heard a lot of bullets hit animals that were lead core. And I said, I know it hit something, but it just sounded different than what I'm used to. It's odd that you took that same thing away, because Preston and I said the exact same thing. And we recorded the shot, and you can hear it plain as day. And I think, like you said, it's that it's hitting with that extra speed, and it's expanding. It's beginning its expansion, within 2 inches of penetration. And that, it made a really audibly different sound than I'm used to. But now that I've heard it, it was a thwack. It almost sounded like a broadhead.
Yeah, it was.
For the archery hunters out there, that's super impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it's an extremely capable projectile. And, I had a lot of experience with the GMX, which is a legacy product that, helped along with, brought the CX into the market, basically. So, they penetrate extremely deeply. The CX is a phenomenal choice for a variety of applications. I mean, unfortunately, there are places that do have restrictions on lead projectiles, right? California being one of them, and other places, and that's a topic for a whole other podcast at some point in time. But so certainly in those locations, this is something that will exceed their expectations. Quite frankly, it's a phenomenal option for them. But then for everybody, really. I mean, if you're hunting deer, great choice. You will get penetration. Like I said, we can't guarantee it, but most of the time you're going to get a pass through, which will end up with a larger blood trail and excellent terminal results. And then obviously up into elk, moose, stuff like that. The best benefit is you will be able to penetrate through bone. It's a rugged, solid bullet that will get you through bone and then impact vitals, and that's a huge advantage. So if you maybe have an errant shot, or, it happens to everybody if you hunt long enough, God forbid, but that animal takes just a slight step forward or backward or whatever the case might be, and your shot doesn't go right behind the shoulder. Well, now you get to go through a bone and get penetration where maybe you weren't before. And lest we forget, there's a little bit of cartilage or meat, and then there's a rib, cartilage and meat, and a rib. So chances are you're going to have to go through a rib on all sorts of animals. Now, the larger the animal, the larger those rib bones. So fantastic choice for all that stuff. And if you're going to Africa, this projectile is going to be a staple. I mean, it is going to be a staple.
Yeah, plains game, primarily, it's probably the bullet to take. It
sets the PH and the outfitter over there at ease when they see you come with a projectile like this.
It's exactly right.
Because they know that your bullet isn't going to have, it's not going to overexpand on bone or whatever the case might be with other designs that might be out there. They know that if you hit this animal, you are going to get penetration. They're confident in that, and you should be too.
Yep. Yeah. And Joe, you could probably speak to that because you just got back from the trip. You go over there. This guy, this professional hunter, he doesn't know you from Adam, so you kind of have something to prove, and your terminal, what bullets you brought and how good you shoot them is probably really confidence inspiring for a PH.
Yeah. It allows your PH to be like, take a breath, and he's like, let's go hunting, because he's like, got the bullets, got the gear. He's confident then. Exactly. Neil summed it up well. One thing that I would add that I love about CX bullets is that bullet it makes up for my deficiencies as a rifleman or a hunter, because let's admit it, I don't always make perfect shots.
Sure.
I don't have a perfect shot opportunity, whatever it may be, and that bullet its terminal performance is going to forgive me for making a mistake.
Yep, that's a really good way to put it. And another one of those fringe benefits that it wasn't specifically designed for, but it's what it gives you as a shooter and a hunter. And it can really round out that last couple % of you do everything you can to get in the right spot and do the right thing and make the right shot. And there's some things that just don't go your way. And this is just that added little bit of you take a shoulder blade, or you have to take a quartering towards you shot or quartering away and come up through the ribs. That's just that last little bit that'll help you be successful.
Yep. That quartering away shot is really the one.
A follow-up.
Yeah.
Shot.
And like Joe said, I mean, here's another whole podcast discussion. I've had this talk with a lot of people, and in the United States, we're not advocates of shooting at running game with the first shot. But what happens after you hit an animal? Well, it's your duty, it's your responsibility to cleanly dispatch the animal so that, A, it doesn't suffer, B, you get to recover your animal. So you're most likely going to be shooting at a moving animal at that point. And that angle isn't always going to be perfect at that point.
Sure.
So if you have a safe backstop, all the other, things are in place, and you're able to take a second shot, because as we all know, those animals typically are dead with the first shot. They just don't know it. So they're gonna go until they expire, until there's no oxygenated blood going to their brain or their legs cannot function or what have you. They're going to keep moving. That's just nature. I would probably just lay down and give up, but animals don't do that. So yeah, your second shot, your follow-up shot, it very well could be that shot that goes in the back of the ribs and you have to push it forward into the vitals. But also, if it's your first shot, you can have confidence that this bullet is going to go from the last rib all the way up into the heart-lung area. It gives you that confidence, I guess, that you could take those shots.
And to sum up the last 2 or 3 minutes of our conversation, it's a confidence-inspiring bullet because if you get a shot opportunity, you're going to punch the tag, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk a little bit, kind of shift gears here to who the CX Bullet's for, and we've alluded to it a lot of ways. And there's a certain answer in here that if you guys don't say it organically, I'll hang it out on a carrot on a stick for you guys. So, Joe,
might need to do that.
Yes,
He's fishing for an answer.
When you guys were designing this bullet, because there's a lot of other projects. Contrary to popular belief, we don't make T-shirts. We're in the business of making product and doing research and development and making better mouse traps. So there are a lot of projects, side projects, skunkworks projects that we could work on, but we chose this one to put a lot of effort and design and resources into. So when you were working on this project, guys, who were you designing this for? Who was your end user that you were making this product for?
We're designing for Jayden in about a week.
I was gonna say us.
That's the answer I was
He was
looking for.
fishing that out there.
Well, and I'm joking, of course, but I mean that seriously. And I set you up for that because Joe, you mentioned it at the beginning. But this is a bullet that we as hunters were after. This is a better mousetrap. And
I got one for you. So yeah, that is exactly right. I think I touched on that earlier, but just for the viewers out there, this is kind of a funny one. So yeah, there are skunk works that have taken place. Things are a lot more formalized now, and we do have official projects, but there are still little projects that take place here and there that advance the company's capabilities. And yeah, for another podcast for sure. But there was this one little skunk works project about in 2007, I think it was, that Joe was a big part of, which was the 6.5 Creedmoor back then. So
yeah.
From a skunk works project, that thing became
Black
became
Ops
huge,
to keeping the lights on.
But I guess what I'm saying though is that was a cartridge that Joe and a bunch of other people, myself included, and of course Dave Emery at the time, were passionate about, and that's what kind of drives a lot of the product development in our company. There's personal desires to have a better quote unquote mousetrap to go hunting with and to use for a certain application or for match purposes. And the Doppler radar, these guys got a Doppler radar because they wanted to see what was actually going on and do more testing and development. And then, here we have cool new bullets that the
Fast
group can
forward a
use.
decade.
Plus, and that translates into products that the consumer likes. And ideally, as a company, you want to create a new product and release it to the public, and the public welcomes it with open arms and didn't know that they needed it until you showed it to them.
Yeah,
and
right.
I think that the ballistic development group that has come up with a lot of these things has done that several times.
Yep, I agree.
But for us though, I mean, I was being funny and stuff here, but I was really being serious as
Yeah.
well. We're making the bullet for Jayden in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I just used
in 2 weeks.
I just use
Going
it as
elk hunting.
Jayden. He's going elk hunting. I'm
Yep.
jealous, but we built it for that guy.
Yeah.
We built for the guy hunting whitetails, pigs, guy flying to Alaska or Africa or wherever. We're users. We built it for those guys. I mean,
Because
all
there's
of
no
them.
difference in that guy and us. The
Yeah.
only difference
Absolutely.
is that we have bullet presses and a radar.
Yeah,
That's it.
That's it.
Yeah, just a little
Just
bit.
bullet presses a radar.
It's that
Yeah.
simple. That's all
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah. So without being facetious, obviously we are passionate about hunting, and we did develop it for us. We also developed it for, I think, the growing community of people who I know we've talked about this, but to start at the beginning and go full circle with this, to get into what I'm going to call moderate distance shooting, really accurate, consistent, moderate distance, 400 to 800 yard shooting. 5 years ago, 6, 7, 8 years ago, was way more labor intensive. There was some bars of entry there, a rangefinder capability, ballistic calculation differences, rifles, optics. I mean, you name it. There was so many things that made it difficult to shoot really accurately at 400 to 500 yards. Well, now it's the technological advancements in firearms, ammunition capability, optic capability, range-finding capability, OnX hunt maps and base maps and map systems like that, where you're in certain places and you can say, oh, that animal's at this distance and the property boundary's here. Like, there's been so many advancements in that the average marksman, like you said, Jayden, the average marksman now is shooting groups at 400 or 500 yards that people at 100 and 200 yards couldn't shoot 50 years ago.
Right.
So I think the modern evolution, or the evolution of the modern marksman, is, I think, kind of who we designed this for, because
Right.
the range capability that at least I see as the general hunting population is progressively getting longer and longer, and we have to keep up with that.
And I mean that, so we don't typically, we're about people having, the right products for different capabilities. And, as far as extended range hunting and all these things go, it's a very touchy subject.
Sure it is.
And, there are people that are shooting animals at, what were traditionally extended ranges or long ranges back in the day. That, like you said, has certainly been changed now. I mean, you're right. People's capabilities, the gun technology, the scope technology, everything has helped the average shooter be able to shoot further. But what's far for me might not be far for you, and that might be a chip shot for Joe. And boy, that's just outrageous for Jayden.
Yeah, I can't make that shot.
So we just For those listening or watching, these two guys sitting right here are actually really good shooters.
Yeah.
But so we don't engage in that. But now people are using bullets at ranges that are further than they ever were before. We're not going to tell you that, okay, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600. We're not going to put a number on this for you, and you have to determine what's right for you. I mean, I've been on elk hunts where I was hunting with a guy, and his limit was 400 yards. That's just where he felt comfortable shooting. That was the end of it. Now, if you've hunted elk in the West, there's a lot of times where you need to be able to shoot cross canyon, and we were faced with one of those circumstances. And this elk was at 450 or 5. I can't exactly remember. So his number was 4, and he was very disciplined in it, and I commend him for it because he didn't try to overcome his limitations by taking that longer shot. So we watched that elk at whatever it was, 500-ish, and then we went back and had a sandwich, and then we went and hunted that elk, and he killed it that afternoon at 200 or 300 yards. I don't really remember how far it was, but regardless, we are going to make projectiles that are going to work in X to Y velocity range, and that velocity range translates to distance typically.
Mm-hmm.
So the ELDX, there was a lot of people that were shooting animals, further than what had been the norm for a long time. So we developed a bullet that had the capabilities of, which was huge, quite frankly, to work reliably at higher velocities. So shortly after muzzle exit, all the way out to extended ranges. We will let you determine what is extended range, because what's extended range for me is not for you. Just like I said earlier. So now with monolithic projectile technology, the advancements made with the CX enable that projectile to have terminal performance now beyond what was the typical velocity range, i.e. velocity range for monolithic projectiles. So by making it more aerodynamically efficient, by increasing the BC, by incorporating a heat shield tip that now makes that bullet a solid shape essentially as it flies through the air, you can use a Doppler radar to measure it. You can enter it in a FORDOF program, and now you get an extremely accurate trajectory calculation for that person to now employ in the field.
Yep.
So we have provided a product that now is capable of doing more than monolithic projectiles were capable of doing in the past. They've always been really good at those fast velocities. That's where they really shine. You're a wildcatter and you built some, 50 caliber neck down to 6 millimeter. Good luck.
Speed of light.
You'll get 3 shots and burn out your barrel. But that's where you need to have a bullet that's a monometal bullet essentially, because you can't spin the jacket off. You can't, take it apart, due to aerodynamic heating or anything like this. So that's what we've done here. And I mean, I'm not trying to sum it all up in one statement, but essentially, all these advancements now have made a monolithic controlled expansion hunting bullet that's capable of doing more than any controlled expansion monolithic hunting bullet has done in the past.
Yep. That's a great way to put it. And I think one thing that we need to talk about specifically, and you'd mentioned it about the, we're not going to tell you what distance to hunt, but
it's just that this is such a hot button issue.
Yeah.
And it's just a toff one.
Yeah.
It's just so subjective too.
Don't need to touch on that. What we need to touch on though is if you're going to determine a distance that you want to hunt at, you have to be educated about the parameters that your bullet requires for performance.
Absolutely.
So velocity makes the bullet work. It's not energy. Velocity makes the bullet work. So Joe, Jayden, what kind of velocity limitations, not range, because that's up to you, but what velocity limitations are we working with this new CX bullet?
It's about 2,000 feet a second. That's a pretty good line that's going to work very effectively.
Okay.
So if you're a hunter, you're going to use the CX bullet, and you're wondering, hey, what's the envelope that this bullet's going to work within? Get in your ballistics calculator, preferably FORDOF, because that's going to give you the most accurate numbers possible compared to using, say, a BC.
Mm-hmm.
go in there and look at your retained velocity as a function of range and figure out where am I approaching that 2,000 foot per second of retained velocity and what range does that correlate to in your specific environment, that you're going to be hunting at, because that's going to affect, retained velocity.
Sure.
So you look at those numbers and that gives you an idea, okay, I can effectively shoot an animal and have the bullet perform as designed within this range envelope.
Okay. So
and the really cool part about the CX and the fact that we've pushed that boundary with a monolithic bullet, that you can now get the same performance you were getting at closer ranges, you can get those now farther out, is I've personally had hunts where the only opportunity I had was beyond the traditional range that those bullets would work at. So that's either you fill the tag or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And if I would have been using an old legacy monolithic bullet, I personally, ethically, could not take that shot. Just like your example, Neil, of that guy that said, hey, my line in the sand is 400, and that elk was only 50 yards past it, but I'm not going to go over that. And he didn't take that shot. I've been in that same circumstance. And the fact that we've taken this bullet and increased its performance may mean that you're going to fill that tag that you wouldn't have filled with the old legacy bullets.
Yep.
I mean, I guess, like to touch on that and kind of, I think, yeah, this probably a subject for another podcast, but the long range hunting or what have you. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I would take more pride in taking an animal at like 3 feet.
Yeah.
With
Absolutely.
I mean, so if you can get closer, you should. You shouldn't just, okay, we're here, let's just, that's a subject for a whole other podcast. But if you're capable of getting closer, by all means, let's get closer. I mean,
especially with the CX.
Yeah, on that subject, I did
better.
a hunt. Another example. I was on this trip, and it was with a bunch of guys that had just gotten out of the military, and they're all former snipers and but spent a lot of time overseas. And I was going to shoot a scimitar horned oryx, and we get out of the truck, and so these guys are used to shooting bad guys, so. and we're like 600, and when you shoot bad guys, it's not like you go over there and inspect them, and it doesn't happen. You make a shot, impact, no impact. Impact means somebody's wounded. That's going to take up a few more people to help. Anyway, so about 600 yards away, they're like, well, just shoot from here. I'm like, you know what? I haven't shot this rifle a whole lot. If we get to 300 yards, I'm sure that I will shoot and kill the animal, but if we get to 200, I can guarantee it. So I mean, that's just where everybody should be. But now, if you spend time with your rifle and you know the capabilities and you know your own capabilities, you can have other variables out there. But we have made a projectile that's a variable here that you will have. There will be known results essentially.
Yep. And I think, if you've hunted long enough, we've all been there. And Jayden, I think I know what hunt you're referring to, and it goes back a few years, but if I remember right, you hunted for 4 or 5 days, didn't even see an elk, and then last day, you have this elk at this distance, and for every yard you got closer would have been a worse shot.
I couldn't.
Yeah,
it was like a cliff, but you couldn't have done it.
Yep.
It was either that or nothing.
Yeah, and you're presented sometimes with those opportunities, and if you have the right equipment and you have the right knowledge and the right bullet, you can make it happen. You can punch that tag. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is be more successful. And like everybody's mentioned, the goal is to get closer. And sometimes you can't.
Yeah,
and,
that's right.
We're just trying to extend that as far as we can. So in that vein, we touched on it real briefly, but we do need to talk about it because it's another extreme advancement, which is Ford-off. And before we get into why the CX Bullet is applicable to use in Ford-off, we should just briefly touch on why Ford-off is awesome, because for lack of a better term, obviously we've got a dog in the race.
Do you know anything about Ford-off?
Yeah, what do you guys know about
You've
Ford-off?
heard of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've heard of it.
So what differentiates Ford-off from a regular ballistic calculator, and then we'll dive into why this, the legacy monolithic bullets out there aren't in Ford-off and why the CX now is.
Well, in comparison to not make this take 4 hours.
A school bus and a race car.
Yeah, here we go. School bus and race car. So Ford-off versus a traditional BC calculator, meaning everybody's got one, right?
You plug in a BC value,
Yep.
G1 or G7.
Yeah. So that program's pretty basic, and all it knows about your bullet is what you tell it. That BC value, maybe a weight, maybe a diameter, maybe a bullet length, and the story kind of ends there. And so what it's doing is making some kind of scaled values, some approximations to try to predict how that bullet's going to travel, right? So kind of a basic and very assuming in nature about what's going to happen. What FORDOF is a totally different monster. It actually has your bullet in it. There's a model, a software model of your projectile, and everything that dictates why a bullet does what it does in flight, from a dynamic perspective, from a drag perspective, from a stability perspective, all those
Shape,
things,
perspective,
everything is in there. There's essentially a file. When you pick a bullet out of the FORDOF library, a file is loaded, and there's over 400 values that are unique to that specific bullet. And so what it does is it's using your bullet that you're shooting to make the predictions on what's going to happen to your bullet downrange, to give you a come up and a windage solution. Where this other program is just taking one value that's an approximate of your bullet, which is the BC, and making assumptions about it.
Yep.
So two totally different ways to go about it. You could think of the BC method as maybe like an old floppy disk computer, for any of those that are old enough to remember those, and FORDOF would be like a super PC today, you know, the computing power between the two and the complexity of them. But like you said, so the CX has the heat shield tip in it, which makes it applicable for FORDOF.
Okay.
And so this is going to give you, the hunter, 2 hunting bullets now that are supported in the FORDOF bullet library. So the ELDX was in there. Because it has the heat shield tip, and now the CX is in there. So depending on what job you have to do, what your preferences are, what ranges you feel comfortable, whether you want to pick an ELDX or a CX, either way, you're going to get the best trajectory predictions possible.
Yep. And to add on to that a little bit, the traditional and the legacy monolithic bullets out there, and a lot of other lead core bullets out there that have a polymer tip, the reason they're not in FORDOF is because that tip will deform in flight due to aerodynamic heating, and that changes the drag, and it doesn't change it the same every single time.
Yeah, it's not predictable.
You can't predict the trajectory solution because your bullet's actively changing shape.
Right.
So now with that heat shield tip, the CX retains that perfect shape bullet to bullet every time you shoot it, and that's absolutely fantastic. And like we talked about, you can use that FORDOF to get your exact retained velocity at a given range, and that's going to tell you where your bullet's going to work. Yep. So CX Bullet, we're super excited about this bullet launch, and obviously, like I mentioned earlier, we got some pipe hitters of new bullets that are just going to be awesome. So before we wrap this up, I want to hear from all of us what hunts you have coming up that you're excited or going to use this new CX on. Jayden, you've got one like...
I got an elk hunt in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm not excited at all.
My wife thinks that I'm really downtrodden about it.
Yeah. But hey, I mean, an out-of-state tag is no joke. You know?
You got a lot of investment.
I'm at over, I think it's $755 for the tag right now. That's not travel out there. That's not the time spent on meals and gas and all this, right? Vacation. So you have a lot invested. And so when you look at what piece of this total equation that I'm going to go on this hunt with that's actually going to do the job, it's the bullet. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing that touches the animal and does the job. So yeah, it's an important choice.
So you're going elk hunting. What cartridge and what bullet are you taking?
300 PRC with the 190.
Beautiful. Coincidentally, I also have an elk hunt at the end of the month in a similar area. Also taking a big 30. I'm taking a 300 Win Mag. Hand loading that 190 that 190. I'm doing 2950 at the muzzle, and that thing's like shooting a laser beam. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is laser straight, and bucks the wind great, and terminal performance to spare. So I'm super excited about that. Joe, Neil, anything coming up that you're going to use the CX on?
So I've got to use it a few weeks ago.
Yeah, right.
We got to go to. I got a couple. The wife and I drew a couple of cow tags in Wyoming.
Okay.
So we'll probably shoot 6.5s or 30, I assume. PRC, Creedmoor, or 300 PRC. Mm-hmm.
I'm staring down a lovely back surgery that will be happening as soon as possible.
Maybe they could use the copper alloy material.
Maybe they could build me a little bridge in there in my disc and make it out of a CX bullet or something. Yeah. But as soon as that's over, I'm hitting it hard. I do have local Nebraska hunts, and then there's possibility of a mid-Asian ibex in Tajikistan if I can get healthy and go.
Fantastic.
which would be pretty amazing.
What
And then
cartridges are you going to use for each of those? The Midwest Whitetail.
Midwest Whitetail, I'm going to shoot the traditional 300 Winchester, only because I got a new barrel put on a rifle, and I have a suppressor that's mated specifically to that I haven't been able to use for a while.
Okay.
And then the Tajikistan, there'll be a combo. It'll be a media trip, and there will be some guys shooting 300 PRCs, and then the vast majority are going to shoot 6.5 PRCs.
Okay, and so that'll be that 130 and that 190
90.
CX. And again, we've got the full lineup. So the hand loader and the factory ammo, we've got a 6mm 80 and a 6mm 90. All the way up, we've got that 375 cal, and that's a 250.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, sorry, I don't want to get off on this is a rabbit hole here, but man, a 375 Ruger with a CX Bullet. I mean, you talk about something that'll just do everything you want it to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. Probably another whole discussion at some point in time, but that's a bad mamma jamma right there.
Sure, that's a big bullet. It's a big cartridge, very capable.
Yeah, moose, grizzlies, things like that. I mean, yeah, we had a great, one cartridge elk hunting conversation one time, and this guy's like, okay, gun to your head, you have to make a decision, because I kept waffling on stuff, and my answer was 375 Ruger with the CX Bullet, because not only will it do a great job at moderate ranges on elk, but boy, if you had to deal with a grizzly bear,
Grizzly bear.
yeah,
If you could pick, that's pretty fun. If you could pick one cartridge
For the world.
all over the world,
yeah,
375.
yeah. I mean, this is a whole other.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there's lots of good ones, and there's been campfire talks and probably family arguments over
Yeah.
this, but yeah.
Hatfields and McCoy's talked about it, I think.
But that's how passionate we all are.
Yeah.
We love to talk about this
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, and this is a slippery rabbit hole. I can feel this.
Yeah, this is a whole other hour.
Yeah. So,
But outfitter ammo, we should probably talk about
yeah,
that.
I was gonna say. So we've got the 6mm 90, the 6.5 130, and the 30 cal 190. Now those are that slipstream design we've been talking about. Super long ogive, long boat tail. But we've also got the hefty majority of the line between 6mm and 375 was designed for traditional SAMI twist rates per caliber and traditional bullet weights. So you'll see those out there, and we're going to continue to innovate for sure on these new, really sexy bullets, because those they really do help drive the range. Now, factory ammo wise, our outfitter ammo is where you're going to see the hefty majority of these CXs live. That the outfitter ammo, it's really designed as the premier, one of the premier adventure type ammunition lines. Neil can talk more to these points, but it's got a ton of benefits so that it's capable of being taken anywhere, used anywhere.
Yeah, I mean it's all conditions ammo. I mean, so you have a nickel-plated cartridge case, so that was going to resist corrosion and add a little bit of lubricity for feeding and extraction. Coupled with waterproof cartridge cases, so the neck's been sealed, the primer's been sealed, and then you load it with the CX Bullet. So you now have a supremely rugged bullet that's in that line, and then the rest of the cartridge is capable of, it'll withstand moisture and any kind of intrusion like that. So think a Western hunt, right? So you're drop it in a stream, you drop your ammo in the snow, let's say, it might be suspect. I mean, you're going to load and unload your rifle. That's just going to happen on every trip. I don't care where you are. Presumably, you're going to load and unload your gun multiple times. Well, that cartridge falls out. It gets in the snow. It gets in the mud. It gets in the river. Now you can just, wipe it off, and that thing, you can trust that it's going to, the primer's going to ignite, powder's going to ignite, and you're going to propel that bullet and have a successful hunt. So places like Alaska. But then again, let's talk about where there's a whole lot of hunters.
Yeah.
In the southeast.
Yeah.
In the southeast, where there's a lot of humidity. Well, sealed cartridge cases really help out with, again, moisture intrusion getting into your cartridges. I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that buy a box or two of ammo and it lasts them like 10 years.
Yeah.
we want you to buy more ammo than
Go
that.
ahead,
But
shoot that up.
if that ammo is sitting around for a long time, there could be moisture intrusion, and that sure resists it. So obviously for that adventure hunt, but it's totally at home for the guy who's hunting in the back 40 somewhere.
Absolutely.
As well. Totally at home. But yeah, and then Super Performance ammo is the other line where you'll see a lot of the CX bullets. And that line of ammo, another great advent that came about, 10, 12 years ago, I think, about 2009, I think is when that came to be. And that's done through the use of progressive propellant technology. So now you're going to propel your projectiles at 100 to 200 feet per second faster out of your gun. It's just done by using different propellant technology. So it's also progressive, so it burns out faster in your barrel. So a shorter barrel does pretty well with performance at maintaining velocity. So now you turn, kind of a slow mover into a, basically you're going to turn a 30-06 into a 300 Win Mag, as far as velocity goes.
Sure. Yep. And then, the outfitter, the Superformance just hot rod speed, and the CX Bullet thrives on speed.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, for sure. So, and then on the hand loading side, all these bullets we've been talking about, they're available to the hand loader. So if you don't have the most up-to-date edition of the Hornady reloading guide, that is available in an app now, as well as a hardback book. We'll have that app updated with this new bullet information. Again, the hefty majority of the CX line, traditional shape, and you can use your standard seating die and your seating stems. For the new, really long ogive bullets, the 90, the 130, and the 190, maybe an ELDX stem would be a little bit better for that because they do have that super long ogive. But full reloading support, full factory ammo support. Really excited for this bullet. I'm pumped to use it this fall. I think it's going to be really a pinnacle of monolithic bullet performance.
Undoubtedly.
It really is the top of the heap in regard to homogeneous bullets, and I couldn't be more excited about it. So guys, thanks for sitting down and chatting with me. I've said this at the end of almost every podcast that I just now want to go hunting. Like all it did was it just fueled the fire to go out and hunt some more.
That's great.
I wish you guys luck on the upcoming hunts that you're going to use the CX. Hopefully, maybe we'll sit down campfire style and talk about the performance that we saw and the situations we were presented after this hunting season. So again, thanks again. Everybody, thanks for tuning in on another one, and we'll catch you on the next one.